Now, I was about to ignore this game because despite my love for the Persona series, I live in a third world country and I'm in a very tough financial crisis. I recently just moved into a new house and my wallet got screwed thanks to the amount of furnitures and stuff that I have to buy for it. So thank you all for the donations. You guys are fantastic. Anyway, considering my criticism towards Atlus and my stance to not buy any of their lazy cash grabs, why the heck would I want to buy this game? Well, I didn't. I paid $0 for this game because it was actually given to me by Captain Kidd on PC. Thank you, Captain Kidd. So is Persona 5 Strikers a good direct sequel to Persona 5 and totally worth that $60 freaking in its current year? No. None of the Persona spin-offs are worth $60, especially when their mainline game is significantly cheaper. Is Persona 5 Strikers good enough to be played for the newcomers of the series who have zero clue about the characters in the development? And no, it's not. And most importantly, is Makoto and Haru now legal to make lewds with? Yes, they are. You creep.
Help the weak and crush the strong. That's the Phantom Thieves way, and always will be.
Persona 5 Strikers is a sequel to Persona 5 that continues on the story of the Phantom Thieves of Heart. You play as Joker, whose real name can be anyone you want, so I opt for the manga version name Akira Kurusu, but that was a mistake because there's another character named Akira in the story, so I'm just gonna refer to him as Ren. Anyway, Ren is about to go for a reunion with the Phantom Thieves gang and have a big freaking summer holiday trip full of barbecue and fun and all of that. All of this seems to go pretty well. In fact, I wouldn't have minded if the game is just a Phantom Thieves summer holiday special, though I wouldn't mind if the game charged me $60 for it. The group somehow just realized that digital assistants exist and decide to download their World Series equivalent called Emma. Oh, I freaking wish. Ren and Ryuji use Emma to gather up some stuff for the future holiday special event, so they went to Shibuya. But on the way, they meet an idol named Alice. Alice seems to be gathering up lots of people and her fans to celebrate the opening of a particular store. But Alice then gives Ren some form of a card containing her Emma's contact number of some sort. The problem is, this Emma card proceeds to open up the metaverse instead. A metaverse that is themed around a Wonderland castle that is coincidentally the same as what Alice proposed. In fact, Alice could be the king of this location, or the monarch as the game calls it. Throughout the way, Ren and Ryuji meet up with Sophia, an artificial intelligence that got lost in the metaverse and become humanity's companion. And here we go again. The Phantom Thieves have to investigate what's causing the metaverse to exist again, and why their presence is relevant and needed for the world to not end. Again. Persona 5 Strikers still has that Persona 5 aesthetic, but with some new tweaks and changes. There are still loads and loads of red, and if not red, a huge contrast between white and bright colors. The menus still feel like you're looking through a kaleidoscope with so much colors and style matching up from one point to another. Every part of the menu will have their own unique animations and characters that accompany them, although as someone who likes things to be more practical, maybe these menus can just be a little bit faster. However, if we put the menus and the user interface aside, Persona 5 still looks like your typical JRPG game. The character model still looks the same as they are in Persona 5, with the only major difference being a change of wardrobes. The real-world environments still look the same as they are in Persona 5, as in literally copy-pasted from Persona 5. Even the places that Phantom Thieves visit are rather indistinguishable from one another, and the metaverse dungeons feels like they were flipped and copy-pasted straight out of Persona 5. So all in all, the game still looks and feels like Persona 5, which is just as well considering how Atlus is also under development. What about the soundtrack? Well, it's also just the Persona 5 soundtrack with some new additions that are exclusive to the game, obviously. Some of the old tracks got remixed for the purpose of this game. It's still that rather upbeat jazz that is so unique to Persona 5 that people are going after random jazz music to say that they have a Persona vibe to it. It even has the battle tracks from all the previous Persona games, including both the male and female versions of Persona 3's battle music. So while she's not considered canon in the universe, the series at least doesn't deny her existence. Persona 5 Strikers is the second Persona game to make it to the PC platform, and thus the PC port should at the very least acceptable. Well, it's not the most exquisite of PC ports, it's rather bare bones in terms of options, but at least the essentials are there. It doesn't have widescreen support, but at least the game runs okay. It's consistent 60 FPS all around in my GTX 1660 Ti, and I don't have any issues of the game crashing. So So good on the development team for making at least a functional PC port. Let's talk about the story. A lot of my criticisms are coming from the perspective of a die-hard Persona fan, so expect me to either nitpick a lot of things, exaggerate some of the issues that I have problems with that I think most people won't, or just complaining about the things that have changed. In other words, this is gonna be a lot more biased than usual, so consider yourselves warned. Let's start off with the premise, because I've read Persona 5 doujins and fan fictions with more interesting premise. While the story presents itself to be a sequel to Persona 5, it's more like bits and pieces of the Persona 5 story with different characters. It's a sequel that sucks on the original success and is entirely dependent on it. A sequel that does just enough for it to be justified as a sequel, but not enough for me to consider it a good one. Here's my first problem with the story. It's ridiculously predictable. Every single thing that I predict that would happen in this game would eventually happen. Funnily enough, I made the assumption that the digital assistant app Emma is evil. Not because how the metaverse is linked to it, not because digital assistant apps like Alexa are pretty evil in the real world, although that doesn't help, but because how Futaba described it. The app tracks a lot of database, which presumably includes users' activities and make decisions based on those activities, to the point where it's accurate to the user. You would think that the Phantom Thieves would find that, I don't know, creepy? Especially Futaba, you know, the hacker that hacked government institutions before and is anonymous all the time while she's hacking. But nope, Futaba is happily recommending people to download this app at the expense of their data being spied by big tech. I know the writers of this game would recommend an app like that, but not Futaba. I know that the Phantom Thieves eventually realized the sinister nature of the app. It takes them like a couple of weeks, but at least they learned it. I'm just saying, at least some form of skepticism early on would be nice. It's totally out of character for Futaba to just casually recommend this app that lets big corporations to track their activities. It's even more out of character for her to be using it. The only reason for me to believe that she would recommend it to people is if she wants to monitor these people's activities and had to socially engineer them into using an app more vulnerable than real-world digital assistants. In that case, this little gremlin is even more devious than I thought. But that would imply that Futaba is capable of socially engineering people. The game introduces a couple of new characters, and I'm basically playing Among Us with them, trying to guess on who the imposter is, because every Persona game should have at least one imposter. I'm just saying, game, when one of your characters have coincidences piling up to a point of absurdity, that's when I decide that you are sus. So thank you, game, for proving me right. Again. Also, the game does this really dick move of presenting itself that it's going to end, but it pulls off a psych on our face and say, nope, that's not the end. We still have some more stupid stuff left to do. And while that one is not exactly a hard guess, that bait and switch is still rather scummy. As for the actual story, well, it's a bit of a mixed bag. Some parts of the story are really good. The bit with the game's new character Zenkichi and his daughter is very good. It tugs my heartstrings and successfully makes me care for the characters. In fact, I can even go so far as to say that Zenkichi is the actual protagonist of the story, rather than the Phantom Thieves, because he has the most character development, whereas the Phantom Thieves' development are in the previous game, and in this game, they're just there to have a holiday. My biggest issue with the story is that while the story is well structured and organized, it takes a long time for it to get good. The game repeats itself 3 times with 3 monarchs before finally doing something different, and to me it took about 12 hours out of the 24 hours that I spent playing this game. The first half of this game is not that good because they have one mystery plot that wasn't even that intriguing in the first place, and they repeat it twice with different villains. Yes, I know that Persona 5 is a slow boil as well, and it repeats its pattern several times, but at least the gang grows as the story progresses. At least we learn the mystery about the world with the characters. At least we learn about the gang a lot more as the story goes on. At least there are social links with other characters to strengthen our bond with them. In Persona 5 Strikers, you have the original Persona 5 gang and Sophia for the first 10 to 15 hours before you get one more spoiler character in the next. Not only that, but you are learning pretty much the same mystery that you've learned before. The differences between palaces and jails are so minuscule that there might as well be no difference. It's just significantly less intriguing and absorbing than the previous game. But what about the fan service? Surely you cannot go through this sequel game without some form of fan service and slice of life goodness with the Persona 5 gang. And yes, there are fan services and the Persona 5 gang hanging out and having fun. There's even one moment where you can ask anyone you like into the Ferris wheel. But the game completely ignores who you romanced with in the previous game, including who you cheated with, so it's barely a romance at all. Unfortunately, I just don't think there are enough fan service content. I mean, yes, there are there, and yes, they're very wholesome when they're there, but I just don't think they're enough to justify the $60 price tag, especially when Strikers is significantly shorter. Another issue that I have with the game's story is the villains, because all of them are just meh. How the villains work in Persona 5 Strikers is that they are bad, but they're still redeemable. They used to be good people, but they got disillusioned with power and influence. So the Phantom Thieves' journey is less on them trying to make the villains confess their sins, and more on them reminding the villains of the good people that they used to be, and also make them confess of their sins. That is still an improvement over Persona 5, but not by much. The game still has its shares of cartoonishly evil villains. The one big villain of this entire thing is some random politician who looks like fat Japanese Joe Biden. The guy is so cartoonishly evil, he's pretty much Shido 2.0. Same zero redeeming quality, same connection with the main characters, except you don't have a flamboyant boss fight with him, which is kind of disappointing. But wait a second, that's just one cartoonishly evil villain, so where are the rest? Well, they're all hidden in the background. There will always be a certain bad figure in the Monarchs' backstory that shapes their character. That bad figure in their past is the cartoonishly evil villain. So basically what happens is the game has a rat problem, but instead of exterminating them, the exterminators just move the rats next door. I mean, sure, you won't feel the rats in your house anymore, but your house would still be under their watch, and they might return at any point, and in fact, one still do. There's also a villain in this game, which I won't show his actual portrait, but he legit looks like evil Tony Stark, and behaves like evil Tony Stark. I mention him because once the image of him being evil Tony Stark is ingrained in my brain, I simply cannot take him seriously. When the game expects me to take him seriously, I just laugh my ass off. Watch out, Tony Stark! Obadiah Stane is the next Phantom Thieves, and he has your heart! Overall, while the story has its moments and it does make me laugh a couple of times, it is nowhere near as good as Persona 5's story. Nowhere near as well developed, and there aren't enough fan service to justify that price tag. I like the game's new characters and I really do care for them and sympathize with their journey, but the rest of the Phantom Thieves are just there to enjoy some holiday, which makes their role seems less significant. Not to mention, the villains are not great, but that's Persona's tradition at this point. So if you think all of that is enough for $60, you do you, but I think your money can be spent somewhere much better, especially during this economy. But hey, story isn't just the only thing about Persona. It occupies at least 3/4 of the entire game, but it's not the entire thing, so let's talk gameplay. To put it simply, Persona 5 Strikers is sometimes fun, but it's not very well designed. It's not because I hate Musou games, it's not because I hate Persona games. In fact, I love both of them, so this should be a winning combination, right? Unfortunately, combining the two games only leads into the weaknesses of the two games being more prominent, with the strengths of each game being constantly pressured to not show up thanks to the other games' weaknesses. Now, I grew up playing Musou games, so I know what to deal with these types of games. The game still has the effect and the impact of a Musou game. The hits feel satisfying, the power moves that you make will cause hundreds of enemies to be blown into bits and pieces. You can even unleash your persona and still use the demon's original abilities. What I love is how the game's combos will also unleash certain abilities at zero cost, so you don't have to trigger the persona's ability manually. I found out that you can get free HP to all the party through Media Rama using Saraswati by spamming combos. That is really stupid, but also really funny. Unfortunately, the game's mix of Persona elements and Musou elements are rather tacked on. Musou's fast-paced and intense combat will definitely turn off a lot of the people who love Persona's more careful and methodical turn-based combat. It can be satisfying at first, destroying hundreds of demons left and right with a couple of button combinations, but it's still a rather chaotic mess. And even for Musou fans, you might find this game rather disappointing. The game is actually more Persona than it is Musou, but it's not Persona enough for it to be considered a proper Persona game, and it's also not Musou enough to to be considered a proper Musou game. The missions are structured in a very similar way to Persona 5, but in a significantly more simplified version. One jail session of a game starts off with loads and loads of cutscenes, then you begin the investigation. Once you're done, it's basically just a repeat of jail story, until you get to the final boss. What's missing from Strikers is the high school life simulator aspect of Persona, which is totally understandable considering that this is a road trip story rather than a high school life sim, but that means that you're not gonna have a lot of chance to be doing the things that you're doing when you're in the live sim mode, like having to care about the due dates of your DVD rentals because apparently the characters have never heard of Netflix yet. The social link elements are simplified to this bond thing, where the more moments you spend with your teammates, the more bond that you gain throughout the entire thing, and you can spend these points on additional bonuses, but gaining these points at all feels so passive for the most part that it feels uninvolving. So you can say goodbye to any chance of you deepening your bond and understanding with each and every individual crew member. Say goodbye to the romance that you built up in the previous game. Throw all of that in the window. You get moments with multiple crew members, but rarely individually, if you get what I mean. So you are not getting the full Persona experience through this game. You're only looking at a glimpse of it, a much more simplified version of the Persona gameplay, a Persona Lite, if you will. And thanks to the game removing a lot of the aspects that make a Persona game to be Persona, the game is significantly shorter. So if you're expecting a 60-hour long journey, you'd be disappointed when it's practically cut in half, and not much of its life sim aspects are there. The game's fusion system is now assisted by Lavenza instead of Caroline and Justin, so if you want a game where she's the Velvet Room attendant, there she is. However, the fusion mechanics of the game is rather simplified. As someone who loves to fuse demons left and right, I'm disappointed when I realized that you can't experiment that much, and there's really not a lot of value in collecting all the demons. There are additional tweaks that I like, such as Lavenza asking me if I want to register the demons first before I fuse them, which is something that I always forgot to do in the previous games. But the overall fusion mechanics is simplified and just not as fun as a legit Persona game. Also, since the game ditches most of the high school life sim aspect, the dates and the day transitions don't really mean anything at all. You know how in Persona 5, quitting a palace raid will cost you 1 day? In this game, it doesn't cost you anything. You can get out of the dungeons and have your HP and SP replenished and go back into the dungeon on the same day. And you can do this several times. The game might as well turn the checkpoints into a Dark Souls style bonfire and it would have done the same thing. So what about the game being a Musou game? Well, the Musou style combat is there, but a lot of it is hampered by Persona 5's linear level design. What makes Musou style games so amazing is the fact that you are faced with hundreds and hundreds of enemies at once, and you are free to just annihilate them in this big open battlefield. Persona 5 Strikers doesn't have a lot of big open battlefields. Instead, what it has are some tightly constrained areas that are big enough for you to be able to fight a couple of dozen enemies, but not big enough to be considered a proper Musou game, where you actually fight hundreds of enemies. The game just mashed the Persona 5 linear level design, but replaced the turn-based combat with Musou-style hack and slash. You still have the ability to sneak up nearby shadows and ambush them, but the Musou combat doesn't really start until you confront them, so the game doesn't really feel like a proper Musou game. It feels like little bursts of a Musou game that's trying to break free from the shackles of Persona 5's level design. Not to mention, the characters have actual dialogues during the combat that you will surely miss as you're mashing your buttons and beating the living crap out of your enemies. I mean, there has to be a much better way of putting these dialogues in. But at least the game is fun, right? Well, I can't say that I don't have fun with it. I do have fun with the game. It is satisfying to be able to beat the living crap out of hundreds of these goddamn hee-ho gremlins and torch them into snow heaven. I'm just saying that while it is possible for you to have fun with the game does not have the full strength of the two games that it tries to mix together. Yes, the game is structured like Persona. Yes, the combat feels like a Musou game. However, they just feel like the light versions of their respective counterparts. Turns out, combining two light versions of a game doesn't always make a full game. It's like expecting a strawberry tasted Oreo, but instead of getting that, you're only given a half-sliced vanilla Oreo and an already bitten strawberry. In conclusion, Persona 5 got milked pretty much the same way as the rest of the Persona games did, and Strikers is no exception to that rule. Is it a good kind of milking? Well, People seem to love it, and to Atlus's credit, they did release the game on Steam for way too freaking expensive. I blame Koei Tecmo on that. They're never forgiving in their sales for the Asian region, especially the third world countries. But despite my criticisms on the game, Persona 5 Strikers is not bad at all. Putting aside the occasionally fun, if very flawed gameplay, what you'll end up with is a fan service game where you get to have fun with the Persona 5 gang with an excuse plot to make the gang to be Phantom Thieves again. I have loads of nitpicks on the story. I do think there needs to be a lot more fan service, but for what it is, there are also loads of good moments on it too, with good new characters that I actually care about. And to a lot of fans, that's enough. That's all they need for a spin-off sequel game. However, this game is sold for the same price as Persona 5 Royale and 3 times more than the original game, as if to say that the content of this fan service direct-to-DVD sequel that requires you to play the original is worth 3 times more than the original. A game with a self-contained story with more refined mechanics, proper character developments, and better at almost every aspect. I mean, sure, Persona 5 is 5 years old at this point, but at least it's a proper Persona game with a proper Persona experience rather than half of Persona and half of Musou. Unlike Persona 5, where I beat the game around 60 hours, I beat this game in around 24 hours. I wouldn't let anyone who hasn't beaten Persona 5 or don't know about Persona 5's story to ever touch this game, because this game would give them a very inaccurate picture of the series as a whole. And to those who are fans of the series, in this current year economy, $60 for this game is a bad deal. Even Persona 5 Royale is a much better deal than this. Persona 5 Strikers is worth about $30 at most. And huge shout out to Captain Kid for letting me to experience this game, because doing so confirms my belief that the only Persona worth bothering are the mainline games, rather than their direct-to-DVD quality sequels.